on their way. I do welcome everybody, and I would remind you to turn your devices on silent or turn them off, and to use the microphone when you are speaking, and also your travel vouchers. Make sure that we turn those in, and we will have Senator Ware and Senator Thompson with your vouchers. They'll be taken care of. So, good morning, everybody. Let's go ahead and get started with the Osawatomie State Hospital audit. And welcome to the Tax Committee. Could you pronounce your first name? Maury. I saw the spelling and I thought I'll butcher it if I try. No, it's pretty. Thank you, Maury, for being here.
It is now on. So the green was looking a little like it was on, but it's, here we go. So thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Maury Exline, and I'm here today to present an audit evaluating staff safety at Osawatomie State Hospital. Our audit objective was to answer the following question: does Osawatomie State Hospital adequately ensure the safety and security of its staff? And ultimately, our short answer to that question is that Osawatomie State Hospital does not adequately ensure the safety and security of its staff. I do want to go into a little bit of background before we get into our findings. So first and foremost, the legislature established OSH, which is Osawatomie State Hospital, in 1863 in Miami County. It's a state-run facility that provides inpatient psychiatric and mental health services. And then OSH's campus encompasses two independently operating hospitals, and that's OSH and Adair Acute Care, and I'll talk about that in terms of AAC. So OSH provides treatment for people with acute and chronic mental health disorders and has capacity for 116 patients. It offers general psychiatric care as well as competency evaluations for those awaiting trial. AAC is the CMS, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, portion of the hospital, and this portion of the hospital receives federal funding. So AAC provides treatment for people who are in crisis or are in need of short-term care and hospitalization. So while AAC is separate from OSH, it receives central services like facilities and security through OSH through a memorandum of understanding. And then the AAC portion of the hospital can accommodate 60 patients. So just so that you have a little bit of bearings of the OSH campus, there are about 25 buildings on this campus, and these include things like patient housing, physical exercise and activities, administration, and necessary services like laundry and facilities. And then the campus has 533 total authorized positions for fiscal year 2024. So getting into kind of the meat of our audit, I do want to mention that we did a survey of staff to better understand how staff feel about their safety and security at OSH. Staff had mixed opinions about their safety and security, but our survey suggests that current management may be making some improvements. Staff did not provide information on specific incidents that we could follow up on throughout this audit through our survey. However, information on that survey is included at the end of this audit in the other findings section, and the full results are included in Appendix A if you are interested. So because we did not get anything that we could follow up on through that survey, we took a broad approach to assessing key processes within three main areas that we identified as critical to staff safety. So those areas were physical security, personnel, and then working environment and culture. So I'll talk through each of those individually. So first, we looked at physical security. We looked at several different areas of physical security, and I'll touch briefly on each of those. So first, security staff patrols of the OSH campus are often incomplete and inadequate. Security staff are responsible for checking non-patient building exterior doors like the laundry, the administrative, and power plant buildings to ensure that they're locked during non-working hours. We went and reviewed documentation for 1 week of patrols in September of 2024, and we found that patrols were frequently incomplete. So security staff sometimes conducted 1 patrol instead of the 2 that they're supposed to, and also in 56% of the patrols that we reviewed, security staff did not check all of the buildings that they were supposed to. So we reviewed 61 patrols, and 48% appeared to be implausible based on how long these patrols took. So officers reported taking between 8 and 75 minutes to conduct these patrols, which should have included trying to open up these doors physically. And so that suggests that the quality of these patrols varies widely. So the second area that we looked at was that security staff did not have enough fire-trained staff to respond to campus fires because they haven't conducted fire training since March of 2024. So at the time of our review, OSH policy stated that security staff should provide protection of patients, staff, and visitors, doing things like evacuation, rescue, and fire control. However, OSH hasn't conducted any fire training for security staff since March of 2023, but in that time has hired 10 new security staff and has sent security staff with little or no training to respond to fire situations. So the next area we'll look at is that OSH does not ensure that staff carry required personal safety alarms and doesn't check to see if staff are responding to these alarms timely. So hospital policy requires that all staff who work near patients wear personal safety alarms, and these personal safety alarms, if you touch them, they have a big sound so that it will alert other staff that somebody is in need of assistance. So security staff should be randomly checking to ensure that staff have their personal alarms and that people are responding timely per hospital policy. However, OSH officials told us that security staff have not been checking for these alarms or whether or not people are responding timely since late 2021. So OSH officials did tell us that there is a safety coordinator that began quarterly checks in July of 2021 that review whether or not people have their safety alarms on them. So we did go ahead and review these reports, and we found that in fiscal year 2023, 22% of the staff that were checked did not have their alarms, and then in 2024, 36% of the staff that were checked did not have their alarms. So these checks that found that staff did not have their alarms also check for things like other areas of safety risks, and then areas of non-compliance with policies. But OSH officials told us that they have not reported these issues from these checks to oversight committees or otherwise followed up with these results. So facility staff, the next area that we looked at was key tracking. So facility staff key tracking does not include a complete and accurate accounting of all keys, many of which are missing. So the OSH campus has around 25 buildings, like I mentioned. Most of them have physical key access, and then there are areas within those buildings that also have physical key access, like the patient units and different cabinets and things. So Grand Master keys access multiple or all areas of the hospital. And security staff, or facility staff, should be assigning staff only the keys that are necessary to do their job. However, and then also facility staff are responsible for tracking who has what keys and having those key agreements for each of those staff members that have keys. Facility staff should also be retrieving keys from departing staff before they leave. So we reviewed a selection of work orders from 2023 and 2024, and we found issues with 6 of the 9 work orders that we reviewed. So for instance, 3 of the work orders did not specify who should receive which keys, and then 3 of the work orders did not specify specifically which keys were being ordered. So policy requires employees to sign those key agreements when they pick up their keys. However, 4 of the 10 staff that we reviewed either didn't have a key agreement or they had a Grand Master key without having had approval, or both. We also noticed that OSH had 56 keys identified as stolen, including keys that grant access to patient units. And then OSH identified many other keys, including eight Grand Master keys that are lost. So ultimately, in terms of physical security, we found that management lacks effective policies over these physical security measures, and staff have allowed these issues to persist. So OSH does not have policies or is missing documentation for a couple of the physical security processes that we reviewed. So those are things like how campus patrols should be documented in the process for retrieving keys from departing staff. So in other instances, OSH lacks adequate oversight to ensure that staff follow policies. So for instance, the chief of security told us that he does not review documentation for security patrols, nor has he provided training on how to conduct those patrols. We also look in terms of keys, OSH management has known about issues with missing and stolen keys since at least April of 2023 to our knowledge, and hasn't taken substantive action to secure the campus as of October of 2024. So ultimately, part of hospital management's job should be to promote an environment that protects both staff and patients. And to do this, management needs to establish clear policies, train and monitor staff for compliance, discipline staff for noncompliance, and generally oversee the hospital processes to make sure that they're working as intended. So moving on to the second area that we looked at, and that is personnel. So we reviewed 5 areas of personnel, and I will touch on each of those briefly. So first, we looked at staffing ratios. This shows the number of staff per patient, and this is an indicator as to whether or not a facility has enough staff. So we reviewed staff schedules and timesheets for 2 separate 2-week periods in August of 2023 and August of 2024. And we found that in all but one of the shifts that we looked at, they met minimum staffing requirements, so they were adequately staffed. The second area that we looked at was training records, which are indicators of whether staff has or is prepared to do their jobs and respond to emergency situations. So in general, we found that a sample of staff that we reviewed for a sample of types of training that we would have expected for them to have in terms of safety, that 95% of those staff met those requirements during the 3-year period that we reviewed. There were issues in 2022 with 3 staff members not having the training that we would have expected, but those staff members did have the expected training in the following years. So I'll talk about the third and fourth areas together as they are related. So turnover and vacancy rates are separate but related measures. The turnover rate measures how many staff left the hospital during the year, and then the vacancy rate measures how many positions remained unfilled during that year. So OSH's turnover and vacancy rates for state staff were high in the 2 to 3 years that we reviewed. The turnover rate for state staff averaged 37% annually over those 3 years, and this is significantly higher than the turnover rate of other Kansas hospitals, according to a survey by the Kansas Hospital Association, which surveyed 110 Kansas hospitals. The average turnover rate for those Kansas hospitals was between 16 and 30% in 2023. In terms of vacancy, the vacancy rate for state staff was about 43% in 2023 and 39% in 2024. And this was actually similar to the vacancy rate for the Department of Aging and Disability Services reported for Larned State Hospital, which was 45%, and Parsons State Hospital, which is 24%. So in order to deal with high levels of vacancy, OSH hires contract nursing staff to fill vacant nursing positions to meet its minimum staffing requirements. So, however, this is a short-term solution. It adds to high turnover because contract staff have short-term contracts, usually about 3 months. So this adds to more turnover within nursing positions. So as of September 2024, 47% of mental health technicians and 50% of nursing positions were filled by contract staff at OSH. The short-term nature of these contract staff means that they too have those high turnover rates. So finally, in a similar vein, OSH relies heavily on overtime to meet its minimum staffing requirements. So we looked at overtime as an indicator of whether the facility has enough staff. And large amounts of overtime can lead to increased costs, employee stress, and decreased quality of service. So we found that OSH does not monitor how much overtime an individual employee works and has difficulty tracking on a person-by-person basis, especially for contract staff. Ultimately, we looked at data for overtime, and we found that about 95% of the state employee workforce at OSH worked overtime in the 2 years that we reviewed. The largest amount of overtime that a single person worked was 840 hours in 2023, and then 574 hours so far in 2024. On average, staff usually worked between 80 and 100 hours of overtime in those years. So ultimately, a high reliance on contract staff and overtime result in increased state costs and risks for staff safety. So hiring contract staff to fill vacancies created by state staff increases OSH's costs, and this is because contract staff are more expensive compared to state staff. So you can see what those rates are in Figure 2. So having staff work large amounts of overtime also increases OSH's costs. Staff who work overtime cost 1.5 times their normal wage, or for contract staff, 1.5 times their contracted rate. So the hospital paid out to both state and contract staff $6.5 million for overtime in fiscal year 2024. And we estimate that OSH spent about $4.5 million more on contract costs and $2.5 million more on overtime in 2024 than it would have if it had had sufficient state staffing. So high vacancy and turnover rates in overtime also increase risk to staff safety and likely compound the issues we found in physical security. This is because there's the decreased institutional knowledge and experience with patient populations at OSH and AAC when there's high turnover. There's also a lack of knowledge and experience with the proper policies, procedures, and de-escalation techniques necessary. Overtime may also increase the risk of fatigue and burnout and low job satisfaction. So the final area that we will look at is working environment and culture. We did several things to evaluate culture, including reviewing policies and procedures. We also reviewed safety-related data and reports to determine whether or not management was taking a proactive approach to identifying potential safety concerns and appropriately responding to those issues. Finally, we reviewed the hospital's investigations and a sample of 30 complaints, and we talked with staff via phone and email and conducted a survey to better understand their perceptions of the culture at the facility. Overall, we found that management was not adequately promoting a culture that prioritizes safety, and we found 4 key issues. So first, OSH management has not set clear expectations for how safety and security processes should work. So we found many areas where the hospital lacks policies which detail standard practices. And then we also saw areas that policies don't sometimes reflect current practices. The second area is that OSH management hasn't collected and used data to proactively identify and fix safety and security problems. So for instance, management does not currently have processes to compile or review relevant data to safety. So for instance, the overtime, like I talked about before, they do not track overtime by state or by staff member at present. And then management also does not have a centralized system to track safety incidents and staff discipline. So staff report safety incidents to 2 separate departments who conduct separate investigations and recommend disciplinary action. But this is not centralized. And then management also does not have central documentation for when staff activate those personal security alarms to determine whether or not there are issues in a specific area of the hospital or with a specific person. So in areas where data does exist, management sometimes does not have adequate processes in place to utilize it. So safety coordinators perform those quarterly checks to collect and report safety data, such as physical issues with buildings, and whether staff are wearing those personal security alarms. Management does not appear to use this information collected to feed into any assessments or systematic issue analysis at this time. This is an issue because collecting and using data is critical to ensuring staff safety and security, because it allows management to be aware of and take preventative action for staff safety risks. So third, OSH management hasn't adequately addressed safety and security problems when it becomes aware of them. So we reviewed a small sample of complaints that staff reported to determine how management responded to and addressed staff safety and security issues. Management didn't take disciplinary action when we would have expected them to in several incidents that we reviewed. For instance, a staff member was injured at work and appeared drunk and should have gotten a suspension, but that didn't happen because OSH did not take action quick enough. In other instances, management took disciplinary action, but we don't think it was appropriate to address the issue. So for instance, in one case, an individual was not completing job duties, leaving keys unattended, and disposing of patient possessions improperly. And this staff member received 5 verbal consultations over 15 months, but there was no evidence of discipline progressing beyond that. So finally, OSH management hasn't established a culture that prioritizes professional boundaries or encourages people to speak up when they know about safety risks. So we looked at staff complaints, and staff appear to regularly discuss inappropriate or unprofessional topics, including sexual innuendos, physical appearance, and bullying. We also observed or heard about multiple instances of staff feeling discouraged to report safety-related problems. So for instance, there were multiple instances of staff admitting to knowing or hearing about or experiencing issues, but not reporting them because they were fearful of retaliation or didn't think that it would make a difference. So ultimately, we made 5 recommendations in this audit related to developing and maintaining clear expectations, and developing policies and procedures related to safety and security measures and culture, and implementing data collection processes and using data to make informed decisions. And with that, I will open myself up for questions.
Thank you. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think you referenced in your report that outcomes on some of the concerns had improved recently versus prior years. The current management structure, do you know how long the current administrator at that facility's been in place?
I have the exact date. I can get you the exact date, but I believe it was 2022. Scott Brunner is here from ks, and he can give you a for sure date on that, but the current superintendent took over in, I believe, October of 2022.
I just want to say, I mean, the findings in this report are concerning up and down the line, and you have seen some improvement over, what, did you do a comparison to 23? I'm trying to remember.
So there were internal surveys that had been conducted. So we looked at internal surveys that had been conducted over the last several years as part of kind of our background research as we were getting ready to do our own survey. And so we compared those survey results to the survey results that we collected, and it appeared that things were progressing and seemed to be getting better.
Committee, any other questions? I would like to thank you for this audit. You did a 4-week sampling. Is that when you found the drunk driver, or was that another outside of that 4-week period that you were there?
A 4-week sampling.
Well, it says in here that you were looking at a 4-week period on your.
Okay, so in terms of, I think that what you're referencing is near the end in the staff complaints that we looked at, and that was a separate sampling. So there was a 4-week period, 2-week periods that we looked at staffing, but we also looked at complaints. It was a different sample. We looked at complaints from 2023 and 2024, and we judgmentally chose several to look at so that we could get kind of a smattering of different kinds of issues. And so that's where we found the drunk driving piece.
Okay, thank you. And I would echo Representative Francis' comments. This is quite disturbing. And I just am very impressed with the thoroughness of the audit, and it's very much appreciated. This is why this committee exists, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Representative Tarwater.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm looking at your charts on page 28 and 29, as well as on page 19, and it appears that former staff versus current staff, the current staff seems to look at things more favorably. Can you tell me, did you also interview the temporary staff?
Yeah, so if you're talking about contract staff,
Yes.
yes, contract staff were a part of this and former contract staff.
Okay, and then the turnover seems to be increasing, although the results of it, 28 and 29 seem to be doing better. How many of the contracted staff, would you know this? I'm not sure. This was not what the audit was about, but it's something that concerns me greatly. How many of these contracted staff used to work for the state and moved over to the contracted staff because they pay better?
We do not know the answer to that. However, I know that there was a report by Ashley Byram, the superintendent, that talked about a little bit about talking to contract staff and what it would take for them to move over. I think that was released last year.
And I think,
Madam Chair.
Representative, since the department's here, I would ask that you ask that question of them. Any other questions, committee? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we did this comparison between current staff and former staff. Do you feel like that's a good comparison on the change of attitudes? As I just think anecdotally, if it's a former staff member, they're more likely to be disgruntled than a current staff member.
I think that that is a fair assessment to make, that somebody that left may be more likely to respond if they had more negative feelings. We can't say whether or not that is true for the survey that we did, but that's a fair question to have.
And so anecdotally, and you may not want to comment since it's anecdotally, do you think things are improving? Or do you have a feeling?
Well, I can say that their response to our recommendations was generally positive. The agency did agree with our recommendations and has put steps in place so we can see, or so they told us, to make positive changes. And so I think that suggests that there are positive changes being made. But other than that, you're right, it's anecdotal. I don't know that there's anything else we can glean from that.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. Would the administration step up? Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Scott Bruner. I'm the Deputy Secretary at KDADS for hospitals and facilities, and I work with all of the hospital superintendents. Ashley Byram is on the WebEx as well. She had an accident last week and isn't not supposed to travel, so she's on the WebEx, but if you have a question directly for her, she's on as well. Can confirm her start date was in October of 2022.
Representative Tarwater.
Thank you. I was hoping you could answer that previous question I had. How many of the contracted staff used to work for the state?
So the superintendent may know specifically, but we've been looking at that and trying to monitor if there is any shifting from the state side to agency and between the two campuses, Larned and Osawatomie. It's very rare that it's happened, if at all. But Ashley, do you have a better response about anybody in particular that's moved from state employment to the temporary staffing?
Yes, Ashley Byram, Superintendent, Osawatomie State Hospital. What we're actually seeing is with recent pay adjustments, bonuses that we've added, we're actually seeing individuals going from contract staff to state employees. That has recently been a shift in the last 2 months.
So, Representative, I don't think we've had any or a measurable number of state staff that went to work for agencies, even though they're paying, we pay them more, and in many cases, they're paid more directly.
Good. So just as a follow-up, before we made the pay rate change last year, were there a lot of people, when they left, did they cite the fact that there was someone else doing the same job as they were, being paid twice as much?
Actually, I don't know if you saw any of that in exit interviewing or not, but
Yes, we did see that quite a bit. Staff would say, we're doing the exact same work. A lot of it was the mental health techs saying this person's getting paid 3 times more than we are for the same job. So with the recent pay increases, we have seen improvement with that.
Okay, thank you very much. Glad it's working.
Just to clarify, that's mental health tech, so that's a non-licensed, but our direct care staff, but we hire some of them as agency as well.
Thank you. Senator Peterson, then Representative Francis.
On the personal alarms, are those just a sounding device, or do they have a GPS in them? I know you're exploring a GPS.
The current ones we have are just a sound device.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So one of the biggest things that I was concerned about was the reports in this about somebody that had been drinking or drunk transporting a patient, and I can't remember the specifics of the other drunkenness. The fact that those weren't escalated seems, well, that they're even still employees if they were drinking on the job seems ludicrous to me. Would you like to respond to those 2 issues, either you or the director?
Yes, I can respond to those. When we have an investigation or a report, we do a very detailed investigation in regards to the proposed allegations. Then I receive the report, I review it. I have a meeting twice a week with our KDAD's legal, central office, HR, to make sure that we're doing the same kind of discipline throughout all 4 facilities. In this specific incident, the individual had an opportunity to meet with me to kind of talk about what was going on. They explained themselves. They also had already agreed to go into inpatient treatment. So they went to inpatient substance abuse treatment. So we used the employee assistance program that we have through the state for them to be able to participate in that. So they did go complete their program and then did return. They did have formal discipline, but it was not at termination at that time, since they agreed to go to treatment.
So I mean, this is Senator Tyson. I am going to ask a couple of tough questions, and a reason that this audit came about was because I received phone calls from individuals who were working at the facility. One of them had been there for quite some time, over 10 years, and the other one approximately 5 years, and then a short-term person. And they left the facility. They felt they were in danger. They knew of the drunk driving incident. It was more than one patient in the van. And there are drug abuse and other items that they reported. Their safety, they felt so much in harm's way that they left a job that they had been at and that they treasured helping these patients, but they could no longer work in this facility because of their safety. Would you like to address that?
So a lot of times, there is several different sides to a story, and a lot of our staff on the campus don't know the very specific details of the investigation. We look at every complaint incident, very detailed. The state as a whole, we started doing more investigative situations. So we have an outside investigator that comes into campus to meet with people. This is a new program that we started about 2 years ago. And so we look at every allegation at every different angle to make sure that everyone is safe. Sometimes those reports do not come to me. Sometimes people do not report those things. So we encourage people to report. We do have 2 ways to report, which is one through HR, one's through risk management. That's due to statute, but we're not able to make those changes if we're not aware of them.
So the retaliation is something that I've heard about before too. That is nothing new for this facility. I think we have some major problems here. The history of this facility in the management, and I know you've only been there 2 years, But the turnover in the last 5 years, how many superintendents have you gone through at this facility?
Well, I have been there since 2005, so I know that I personally have been through several different superintendents. Um, and it is very frustrating for superintendents to come in, learn the hospital, and then try to make changes in that short amount of time frame. So it is very difficult.
Just one change in the last 5 years, but we have had 3 superintendents over the last decade or so, 7 years maybe, but only one in the last 5. Senator, it's a very fair question, and I think the audit did raise that, captured some of that same kind of concern that you've heard about retaliation. Quite honestly, we hear similar kinds of reports on all 4 state hospital campuses, so that part's not unusual. I think the response is what's important, and so we've implemented through Ashley's leadership and on the other campuses as well, additional channels to have those complaints come. The structure that we work in between having human resources take reports and risk management take reports is pretty complicated and makes things a little more. It does upset timelines and things, but it does provide those different channels. And really, a complaint that comes in one could go through both processes or one or the other. Again, I think there are multiple channels. We've been in very active conversations with the labor union as well as another path to have complaints come in and find ways of dealing with those issues more proactively. I think with particular reference to the audit report, the work that the team did as they were talking to staff, talking to the leadership about things that they were finding. In our response, we documented where we made policy changes immediately, have implemented some other process changes to capture that information and share it, not just with the team on the campus, but also with the governing body, which is the agency leadership that also oversees it. So I think there are some things in place that again, with the ongoing monitoring, we can see the change. The last thing that is going to happen because of the audit is a couple of what we call QAPI goals or quality improvement goals, specifically around some of these issues of reporting and staff safety, that then will have a formal reporting process within our governance structure. It's an important issue to be aware of, and I'm glad that was raised. Again, we have as an open door policy as we can maintain. Again, as Ashley said, there will be some differences of opinion about how those things come out, but it's about having channels to receive the information in the first place. So I think we've made some positive changes in that direction, particularly on the Osawatomie campus.
So if I may, it's quite disturbing, the unprofessionalism, the language, some of the stuff going on at the hospital. These hospitals are needed. There is a great demand. I just hope that we can get this under control. And I say we, but it's you. The legislature, we can jump up and down and scream all day, but the bottom line is you have to perform. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Committee will move on to the next audit. It's Commerce Transparency Database. Cade, welcome.
And now it's on. There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here to present the limited scope audit evaluating whether the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Transparency Database includes the required information and functionality. There was just one question for this audit, and that was, does the Department of Commerce's Economic Development Transparency Database meet the requirements in state law? And the short answer to that audit question is that the transparency database does not contain some statutorily required economic development programs, and it is also missing certain program and recipient level information. So we'll start on page 3 of the report. We'll cover some background information to start. So in 2019, the legislature passed a law mandating the creation of an economic development incentive program database for the purposes of providing the public with information about economic development programs and recipients in the state of Kansas. And this is commonly called the transparency database, and that's how I'll refer to it going forward as well. The Department of Commerce is responsible for creating and maintaining this transparency database. So to that end, the department is required to gather all the statutorily required information for the database, even if that information comes from other state agencies. The department also has to update the database regularly and include new information about programs and recipients when that information is required. So what are the requirements? The transparency database must contain program-level information and recipient-level information for economic development incentive programs. And now these economic development incentive programs are broadly defined in statute. There's no actual list in statute, but it includes things like eco-devo programs administered by Commerce, tax credits administered by other state agencies, and other programs like property tax exemptions. So turning to page 4, just briefly, statute requires that the transparency database contain specific functional features as well. So first, the database must be accessible from the Department of Commerce's website homepage. Second, the database must be searchable, such that users can find specific information in the database. And then third, the database must be printable by the user. And just real quick before we get into the findings, I'll just kind of cover what the database looked like during our audit. So in figure 1 on page 5, you can see a screenshot of what the database looked like when we conducted our work. And you can see there's 2 components to the database. There's a program sidebar on the left side of that screenshot that contained a list of programs and links to see program information. And then the second component of the database, kind of on the right of the screenshot there, is a spreadsheet-like table that contained recipient information and records for recipients for all programs. So on page 5, we'll get into our findings at the bottom. So the first thing we did is check to see if all statutorily required incentive programs appeared on the database at all. And given that this was a limited scope audit, we didn't have time to independently search all programs and draft a new list. Instead, we relied on a list of about 60 programs that our office's economic development audit team had used in prior audits. So these are about 60 programs that our office had previously determined to meet the statutory definition and thus would be required to be on the database. So we checked to see if these programs were included in that sidebar list, as well as whether they had any recipients in the table of recipient records. And we found that for 13 of the 60 programs that we checked for, 13 were missing from the sidebar list, the table of recipient records, or both. And you can see a more detailed breakdown of that on page 6, and Appendix A at the end of the report also lists all of these 60 programs and the results for each of them. But because these 13 programs are missing in some capacity from the database, that means they are also missing some statutorily required information, and so they would not be in compliance with statute. We asked Department of Commerce officials about these missing programs, and they told us that in some cases, they were still waiting on data from other agencies before they could add them to the database. In other cases, such as for star bonds, they said that it was difficult to standardize the information into the recipient table format. So next, we'll cover the results of our sample review on page 7. So in order to evaluate whether the database contained the required program level information, we took a sample of 5 programs that were included in the database. We selected the Child Daycare Assistance Tax Credit, the Historic Preservation Tax Credit, the Job Creation Fund, Private Activity Bonds, and Strategic Economic Expansion and Development. And the results of this sample are not projectable to other programs on the database because it wasn't random. So we evaluated whether these 5 programs contained 11 statutorily required pieces of information, and the full list with results for these 5 programs can be found in Appendix B at the end of the report. But the information, some of the information that we were looking for, that included things like program history, program purposes and goals, and then total incentives distributed for the program. And overall, we found that all 5 programs were missing some statutorily required information. 5 pieces of information were missing for all 5 programs that we reviewed. So the 5 pieces that were missing for all of them were compliance rate, return on investment, evaluations, program evaluations, total incentives by program, and then total incentives by county. In some cases, we considered the information to be non-compliant because it required several additional steps or was difficult to find. So for example, total incentives by program could only be found if the user downloaded the database to Excel and then used Excel formulas to manually calculate the total. So we considered things like that to be non-compliant. And then more details for the program sample results can be found on page 7 and in Appendix B. We asked department officials about the missing information for these programs, and on page 8 you can see their explanation. Generally, department officials highlighted technical hurdles and unique programs as reasons for why some information was missing. They also said that some things like return on investment did not apply to certain programs, and so there was no information to provide. We do agree that in some cases, some pieces of statutorily required information may not exist or may not apply to a given program, but in those cases, the database should contain an explanation as to why that information doesn't exist in order to comply with statute. And then next, we'll turn to our sample evaluation of recipient level information. So I'm at the bottom of page 8 now. We selected a judgmental sample of 24 total recipient records from the 5 programs that we had sampled. And just like with those programs, these results are not projectable to all recipient records because it's not random. And for these 24 recipient records that we sampled, we evaluated whether they contained 8 statutorily required pieces of information, which included things like recipient names, addresses, and then benchmarks. So the results of that, all 24 recipient records that we sampled contained 6 of the 8 required pieces of information. However, information related to benchmarks and benchmark progress was missing from most of the records that we reviewed. And we considered them missing because some of the provided labels in the table of recipient records were too vague or confusing to provide useful information to the users. So we considered those pieces of information to be non-compliant for those records. And more detail about that is on page 9. And then last, we'll cover the results from our functionality review on page 10. So as I mentioned briefly at the beginning, there are 3 statutorily required functionalities that the database must have. First, the database must be accessible on the department's website homepage. Second, it must be searchable. And third, it must be printable. And we found that all 3 required functionalities were present and compliant with statute during our audit. And there's more detail about that stuff on the bottom of page 10 and the top of page 11. So just to recap the audit, the transparency database does not contain some statutorily required economic development programs, and it is missing some program level and recipient level information, but it did have all required functionalities. And just as an overall note for the audit, the work for this audit represents a snapshot in time. We were only able to review the database at specific points, and so it's possible that some things have been updated or changed on the database since our review. And again, because it was a limited scope audit, we didn't have time to go back and re-review things and reevaluate things, but department officials did tell us that the database had been or would be updated shortly after our review. And then lastly, on page 11, you'll notice that we had 2 recommendations for this audit. So first, the legislature should consider amending KSA 74-50227 to clarify what elements of required economic incentive program information should be included in the database itself and what elements should be acceptable to be available outside of the database, such as via links to other sources of information. And then the second recommendation directed at the Department of Commerce is that the Department of Commerce should ensure that the transparency database contains all statutorily required programs and information. If there is any information that cannot be measured or included, then the department should include an explanation on the database for why that information does not appear. And to note there on the second recommendation, Commerce officials told us they do not agree with this recommendation. So with that, I will conclude my presentation and be open to any questions.
Thank you, Cade. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and definitely like the improvements that we've seen on the database. It did take 5 years, so good work on providing this audit. But I do have a question. I'm looking at the statute, and I don't know the answer, even though I did meet with Rachel. I'm not sure on this particular question. So I'm looking at the statute, and it says the Department of Commerce shall collect incentive data from economic development incentive programs that provide more than 50,000 of annual incentives from administrative agencies. One of the things we talk about over and over would be the layering effect that occurs at well, it could be the federal, but I'm specifically talking local. So I know that I just saw that the IRBs are on here, so that's great. That's a step forward. What about TIF, neighborhood revitalization programs, property tax abatements? Do you think the statute includes that? Is that a missing part of this?
I can't really speak to that. The statute is pretty broad, so the definition of economic development incentive program, I believe, is in 74-5226. The full list that we evaluated, and again, this was not a list that we independently drafted for this audit. This is a list that our EcoDevo team has used in the past, but you can find that full list of programs in Appendix A in the report.
Okay, it said administering agency, and it does define it as the state agency or department, so it would not actually include, unless, correction.
I would challenge that, Representative Williams, in the sense that we receive reports from the Department of Commerce during session that include all of those, and they take credit for them as being economic development incentives. So they show up in their reports. Why aren't they showing up on that it would be interpreted as such for anybody that's getting all that information. Representative Williams.
Well, thank you for that. And I would just say that it's just almost like a thank you note when you receive a gift. Let's say it's the state or the city or the county. It seems only responsible that when you receive that we have to keep a accounting of it, and that we should see the accounting of it, so that when we're providing additional layering benefits, that we see that. And so if there does need to be a tweak in the verbiage so it's more clear, there's no ambiguity, that could be something to be looked at. Thank you.
Thank you. And Senator Thompson? And before you start, Senator Thompson, I'm going to refer to the revisers and that we work on that language so that we can make that change. Thank you. So there is clarity. Thank you. Senator Thompson. Unmute. Oh, Senator, can you turn up your volume? We can't hear you.
I don't know what's going on with that.
We hear you.
Oh, have you got me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, the reason for this database ostensibly is so that anybody can go on there and track everything that's going on. I'm a little bit discouraged that in the report, Commerce contends they fully fulfilled statutory requirements by providing information in other places on the website. It's supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be searchable. I think it sounds like we need to go into the statute and make it abundantly clear about what we want in this. For example, on the star bonds, everything should be able to be found. And I agree with the Representative Williams that some of the TIFs and community things should also be available as well. So just a quick comment, not really a question. I thank you for this. Is a great audit, and I appreciate all the work that they've done. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Sawyer, and I will let the committee know that the department is here. They do have an update to the database. I'm very glad. I think it is a result of your audit, not Representative Sawyer.
Yeah, no, I agree with the comments that were just made. Things like star bonds definitely need to be included, but I think we need to look at some of these, there are a few on here that shouldn't be included. For example, the number 13, the credit for taxes paid to another state. That's just a lot to avoid double taxation. You know, in Kansas, we require Kansas residents to pay state income tax on all their income, regardless of where it's earned. But if they earn some of that income in another state, lots of times that state also taxes that income. So that's why we provide that credit so they don't get double taxation. So that is not an economic incentive program. That's just a program out there so people don't get double taxed.
Thank you. Committee, any other comments or questions? Thank you, Cade. We'll welcome the department. I'm trying to. We'll go ahead and finish with the department, and then lunch is ready. And we are going to have a working lunch today. We have a full schedule, committee. So welcome, Rachel, and I hope you're doing well today.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Yes, feeling better, thankfully. I'm excited to be able just to give you a quick demo of the transparency database in case you haven't recently been onto the site and kind of played around with it. So within the last probably 6 months, 8 months, we have done extensive work, hired an outside consulting group to help us really be able to present this information that's in a user-friendly, hopefully digestible manner. So we can go ahead and... Thank you. Okay, so this is the new transparency database, and when we talk about the transparency database, we believe that it's all-encompassing. So it's everything that you're going to find on this particular website. So again, trying to make it look nice and pretty and all of the things. So for us, it has two main components. The first being the table within, and you'll see just on the homepage just a snapshot of this table. It does include 106 economic development programs and recipient information going back to 2019, which is required by the statute. The agency has worked hard to create essentially what we call a mega spreadsheet, because that's what it is. There's about 13,000 rows and a little over 225,000 cells of data that we've compiled from not only Commerce, but 3 other state agencies to put this together. And then that table is pulling from that mega spreadsheet. So it's incredibly time intensive for us at this point, but we are working within our agency and Salesforce to get it so it's a much more live process. So essentially this mega spreadsheet will go away. It will be directly connected to Salesforce, so whenever we have grant announcements or a fully executed incentive agreement, you're going to be able to see that information that day. And so we're excited about that, and we keep getting closer and closer. But as you can imagine, it's a lot of work, and we're working with a lot of data. So right now, that mega spreadsheet is updated twice a year, once in the summer and once in the winter, because again, it's a lot of data. So from that, we have worked to really align the language that's in the statute as far as what you're seeing here on the table. So our fiscal year, our tax year, our amount offered, all of those things are there and listed. We've got a scroll bar here in the middle, so you can scroll all the way across and see the rest of this table here. What makes this very complex is that, as you can imagine, all of our 106 programs that we're reporting on have very different components, whether those are benchmark components, different annual reports, different goals and purposes. So it's been challenging for us to try and fit this into one specific kind of boiled down table and provide you with the information that you need. So that's why you'll see lots of different links, lots of different reports, because in some cases we really are trying to over-provide and overshare information with you. The table can be downloaded, so you click the download button and you'll get a great Excel spreadsheet. If I do this now, it will be the entire spreadsheet, so that entire mega spreadsheet. So it'll take a minute to get it downloaded, and then it's a spreadsheet. So ideally, we would like users, if they're really trying to get into that detailed level, whether it's about the recipient or the program or the county or the particular city, that they go ahead and then download that and look at it through that Excel spreadsheet, because again, that's just easier to manage than this kind of interface with on the web. You will see then above the download button is a search function, right? So this is very similar to Google. So you can type in a community name, you can type in a business, a program name, and it's going to pull that information up for you so you can check it out. So if I were to type in independence, it's going to pull up everything that is related to Independence. So it might be the Independence Community College, it might be that particular community, and it's going to show all the programs and all of those kind of statistical information related to those recipients. You can scroll down so you can see the entire list. And then here, specifically for Independence, we've got 5 particular pages within that table of all of the incentive programs and the data that we've collected around those. This whole table, again, specific to Independence, can be downloaded, so you can pull that total, and again, you can kind of manipulate it in a way that's maybe more user-friendly for yourself. We'll go back to just the home page, so we'll clear out my search function. And here on the left-hand side, you're going to see how you can browse by program. So if you click this button, you're going to get a list of all 106 programs that are included in the database. We have them sorted by, if it's coming from the Department of Revenue and it's tax credits, those are all listed then alphabetically under the Department of Revenue. And the rest are then sorted within the divisions at the agency. So you can click on one of these guys, and it'll take you to that particular program page. So it's going to give you just a brief description of what that program is. It's going to talk to you about when that program was enacted. There'll be another button that will take you to actually our actual commerce page about that particular program. And again, lots of great information about how that program works. Back, then you'll see just the table that pulls all of the statistical data, again, related to that particular program since 2019. Again, this can be downloaded. We'll go back. Over here to the sidebar again, you can now browse by location. So this is going to give you, you can search and go to your particular city. These are just listed in alphabetical, so it's not as attractive as I would like it to be, but it does a really good job. You can search by county, same thing, right? You can find your particular county. And we've just pushed live really recently. You can now search by district. So any of the 106 programs that are listed in the database, you can see what's happening in your district since 2019 to May of 2024 when we did our last update. So if we go to Senate District 1, which is Senator Pyle, you'll see all of his, all the programs that have been utilized from his district by those recipients, by the fiscal year, all of that. And again, you can scroll down. There's 25 pages within the table specific to this district, but you can download that and again manipulate it and get your totals.
So Rachel, how far does the database go back to? I see 21 listed on there. Is it
It goes
prior
to 2019, which is when the statute was enacted.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so you did put the data in since then?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a massive change as to what was available, and it's much appreciated. We do have some questions for you. So Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yes, I agree. I'm so excited about this, and I hope that our legislative bodies will be able to use this and become more familiar with it. Now, certainly some things that we would love to still see in. We've talked a little bit about that. One of the things in the statute that I don't see really done yet, and I may be missing it, so I want to ask you again, and it's really the part in the statute that says we want the totals. So for example, if I search a program, and I just searched one, like the JCF, and I didn't see a total. But on HPIP, I think I did see a total, but I wasn't sure if it was. So that's one. And also the totals per recipient. So if I go in and put a particular business, or I should be able to get the total on that. Is that something you're still working on?
Yes and no. So yes, we are working on making those totals more user-friendly and available. Right now, they are available. You just have to download that spreadsheet and do that summation yourself. It takes a lot of coding for us to pull in all 106 of these programs and give you those big totals, and all the different ways that you can filter it, right? Whether it's by recipient or community or district. But yes, that's the goal, and we're getting closer and closer to that. HPIP has the particular total for, I think it's last year, so 23, just because we had been asked for that information and did a lot of work with revenue to be able to get that. So we wanted to include that in the transparency database since we had it right away. So it's maybe called out more specifically than some of the others.
Well, and I would just add on that, that's one of the things that we've asked repeatedly, and it sounds like it is difficult to provide, but I also know that from the appropriation side, we'd like to see what those expenditures are annually in each of those areas. And when we're doing work in a committee, I'm not gonna download the PDF and get my summation total. I really would rather have that at my fingertips. There is a way to just add it in your description for each one and just change that annually and say annual amount 24 or whatever it might be. I do have one more specific question that's really it. It's on the Star Bonds PDF. One of the things that we really wanted when we first brought this forward to the legislature was having the principles. And I noticed that on the PDF, for the developers, there are quite a few that they don't list anything for principals. So I'm not sure why. Is it because is it publicly traded, or is there some reason why we wouldn't have those principles?
That's a good question. My assumption is, I don't honestly have one, so I'll have to get back to you on why some of those aren't listed.
Would you mind emailing your response to Chris, and that way we can distribute it to the committee?
And the only other thing I'd add on that, why that's really significant, is I know that's not in the database, but it's separate from the database, so somehow if we could make sure we put that asterisk on there so people can look to see. But there are individuals in here that might be receiving 70 million or 90 million, and yes, they're sharing it amongst their LLC, but that's significant amount of taxpayer dollars, and I just want to be sure that the body is aware of that. And so the principal names are really, really relevant and important. Thank you. And thank you for doing this. This is very exciting.
Yes, thank you for the update. I would ask, though, the department made a comment in their response and said that they were not able to calculate or determine the return on investment on some of these programs. I would challenge that again. There's classes on return on investment. There's always a way to calculate and figure that. And that is very important for us to know whether some of these programs should continue or not.
Sure. So, Madam Chair, on our programs that, within the statute of those programs that require an ROI or an annual report, all of that information is provided on the transparency database. It's some of these other tax credits that are managed by other agencies that aren't doing those analysis and providing those reports. We do link to, so like, for example, the Department of Revenue does a pretty comprehensive annual report on all of their programs. And so we have linked to that. So it takes a couple steps to find it. And I think for us, it just becomes a capacity issue. We don't have the resources and the staff dedicated, like, we just don't have them to continue to really pull out these specific things, so it's right there at your fingertips. It's just not in our bandwidth. So I do want to share, so we'll go back, sorry. This is the staging site of the database. So like I said, we're continuing to work with the developers to make this information digestible and pretty and nice. And so these are a couple of the new changes that we're going to be pushing out soon. So you'll see that, again, we've pulled out star bonds because the intent was to provide you with more information, and we know that those are highly scrutinized at times, and we wanted it to be available for you. But through good conversation, we will work to make sure that those are included in the maps and within each of the Senate districts in the county, so that it's very clear on where those star bond projects are. And I think that that's doable. But you'll be able to see then some really cool map features based on all of our program data. And then this chart here is really getting at the totals. So this will be by division, so within the division of, within all of our divisions at Commerce, and then all of our other agencies that we're working on, you'll be able to see those totals and kind of in these charts, so that you can understand maybe which ones are having a bigger impact or are utilized more. And then you'll have all of these kind of charts here too, so by recipient. So this would be by, maybe it's a local government, maybe it's a business, but you're going to be able to see what incentives and funding that they're using and how that breaks out. So more to come. It's just a work in progress. It's a lot of data. So again, just trying to make it beneficial for everyone.
So committee, any other questions? Representative Sawyer.
I just want to follow up on the chair's question on the return on investment. You did say for all the programs you actually administer, you do provide that information.
Yes, Representative. So we provide that information for the programs that we administer that the statute requires us to conduct an ROI or an annual report on.
Okay.
That information is provided. So it's off of the home page, and then it's off of each program page.
So it's the ones administered by other agencies that it's difficult for you to get that information and do that.
And then some of our programs we're not required to do those ROIs and those annual reports. And again, it becomes a capacity issue for us. We don't have the manpower to do all of those. So, yeah, so here is where you can find the annual reports and the compliance rates.
So I would ask, Rachel, that you send us a list of what you are doing the ROI on and what you're not. And then we need to take a look at it as a legislature, whether that needs to be expanded. And whether we need to require it of the other departments that are administering the programs. Any other questions, committee? I want to thank you. I know it's taken us a few years to get here. It's much appreciated. I know that this information is going to be very, very beneficial and help us to do our jobs. So thank you, Rachel. And I'd like to thank Cade again for the audit. Excellent information. Thank you. Committee will take it's 10:15. We're a little behind schedule. We'll take a 10-minute break here to grab our lunches and then come back in and continue with the commerce screening audit. Thank you. Welcome back, committee. We'll go ahead and get started with the next audit. Commerce screening. Sam, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Sam Dadds. I'm a senior auditor with Legislative Post Audit, and today I'm presenting our limited scope audit titled Evaluating the Adequacy of the Department of Commerce's Pre-Employment Screening. This audit had one question, and that was, did the Department of Commerce use an adequate pre-employment screening process for select staff who oversee financial matters? Matt Etzel managed the audit. So the answer to this question is found on page 4. Commerce's hiring policies and procedures were not adequate to mitigate the risks associated with hiring applicants with a criminal history. Before we get into the report, I'm going to summarize the findings that led to our answer. So number 1, we found Commerce has a hiring policy and procedure, but it doesn't include any criminal history check or even ask about relevant criminal history during the interview, except for one job that's required by statute. Commerce doesn't appear to consistently use or maintain their hiring template documentation for job applicants. And 3, it appears Commerce may be able to implement some kind of criminal history check based on state law, but they don't do it. So with this information in mind, we answered the audit question from the perspective of whether Commerce has an adequate hiring policy and procedure to make an informed decision about hiring staff with a relevant criminal history for the jobs we reviewed. We didn't evaluate if Commerce made the correct hiring decisions for the jobs that we reviewed. So general background information starts on page 4. That's summarized as Commerce's hiring practices came into question after they unknowingly hired a felon who then oversaw the state's economic recovery from COVID. And concerns arose around why Commerce didn't know about the previous conviction. Also on page 4, we discussed some best practices for criminal history checks. And best practices recommend criminal history checks for certain high-risk jobs. So a criminal history check can include reviewing court documents, local and national law enforcement records, or registries and watch lists. And law enforcement agencies such as the KBI or a consumer reporting agency can compile these records for employers using an applicant's name or fingerprints. The KBI also has a publicly available web tool where anyone can search for public criminal history records for Kansas for a small fee. So criminal history checks are usually performed when jobs grant access to vulnerable populations, sensitive information like financial information, or for public trust positions. However, criminal history checks should be targeted and tailored to the jobs. And this is because using any criminal history to automatically disqualify an applicant from any job could violate Title VII of the Civil Rights Act by creating a disparate impact on one or more protected classes. There's additional information about the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission's recommendations for implementing criminal history check policy on page 5. And at the bottom of page 5, we discuss information about criminal history checks for state agencies. So state law identifies specific jobs that enable agencies to request a national criminal history check through the KBI. And agencies use the KBI to perform this national criminal history check for these jobs using the repository maintained by the FBI. Depending on the job, the national criminal history checks are fingerprint-based or name-based. And there are over 50 jobs identified in state statutes, which are listed in Appendix B. Executive Order 1812, which was implemented in 2018, also prohibits staff of executive agencies from asking about an applicant's criminal history during the application process. It prohibits any criminal records from disqualifying an applicant from an interview, but this executive order doesn't prohibit executive agencies from conducting a criminal history check as a condition of employment. And this EO aligns with recommendations made by the EEOC. So with those specific conditions noted, state law appears to generally allow employers to conduct criminal history checks with the written consent of the applicant. But Department of Administration officials told us it's their interpretation that there isn't a general authority for agencies to conduct any type of criminal history check because it's not explicitly in statute. So in Commerce's case, state law identifies only one job that requires a national criminal history check through the KBI, and that's for the boxing commissioner. Our evaluation starts on page 6 with our methods, and to summarize them, we reviewed hiring documentation from personnel records for Commerce's 5 most recent hires overseeing financial matters. There were 3 program managers and 2 accountants, and they were hired from 2020 to 2024. Our selection isn't projectable to all Commerce hires, and again, we didn't evaluate whether Commerce made the correct hiring decision in each case. We found that Commerce's hiring policies and procedures do not include any type of criminal history check for any jobs other than the one in statute. And Commerce officials explained that they use the same hiring process for all of their unclassified jobs. So for example, there are specific job-specific questions and standardized questions asked to the applicant during the interview, but those questions don't include asking about criminal history. They also said that once they've decided to hire an applicant, they perform a reference check and a social media check on the applicant. That includes searching their name in a search engine. Officials said they rely on references, social media checks, search engine results, and applicants being forthcoming and honest about their work history and their criminal history to reveal any potential problems. On page 7, you'll find some information about why Commerce doesn't do state-level criminal history checks. In short, that's because they don't think they have the authority to do so they don't think they have the authority to do them using the KBI's resources. And although state law appears to allow employers to conduct criminal history checks with the written consent of the applicant, state agencies still can't use the KBI to do a national criminal history check unless it's enabled by statute. Commerce officials told us they were unaware of the criminal history check options they could use, such as a consumer reporting agency. Consumer reporting agencies are companies that may provide employment screening services that include credit checks, license verification, and criminal history information from state and federal databases. And at the bottom of page 7, we discussed that Commerce didn't adequately document their hiring procedures for 3 of the 5 staff that we reviewed. We saw Commerce has templates available for documenting interviews and reference checks. However, reference check summaries weren't available for 3 of the 5 employees we reviewed, and interview notes were missing from 1 of the 5 employees we reviewed. And this means we couldn't determine if Commerce is following these processes consistently. So state retention policies require agencies to retain hiring documentation in the full personnel file for the length of the employee's tenure plus 3 years. So we would expect Commerce to use their hiring templates during the hiring process and retain that documentation in accordance with state regulations. But Commerce officials told us they don't retain some hiring documentation past 3 years from the date of hire. So we had 3 recommendations for this audit, and you can find them on page 8. Recommendation number 1 is the legislature should consider clarifying when and how executive agencies can obtain and consider criminal history information on prospective job applicants from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation or other sources such as consumer reporting agencies.
Yes, Ty finally got around.
Commerce should strengthen their process for checking the backgrounds of applicants applying for jobs that oversee financial matters in accordance with EEOC best practices. And finally, Commerce should use their available templates to create interview notes, reference check summaries, and internet search summaries, and retain those documents in accordance with the state's retention policy for personnel files to ensure Commerce can justify hiring decisions if they're questioned in the future. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to stand for questions.
Thank you. Another good audit. Thank you to the audit staff again. I have grave concern over this, and I appreciate your findings. It's very helpful. Committee, any questions? Committee, any questions for the department? Representative Tarwater.
So has the department ever done a background check on anyone? Or has it always been that they just thought they couldn't do it?
For any employee, I believe when we interviewed them, they said they couldn't recall ever doing a background check for any of the staff that they've hired.
Because in their mind, they can't, or in their view, they couldn't.
Yes, that's their perspective, is they can't do that.
Okay, thanks.
So I'd like the department to step forward, please. I have a few questions. I'm sure other committee members do too. Thank you again, Sam, for the audit. Welcome.
Afternoon. Bob North, Chief Counsel, Department of Commerce.
Welcome. Do you want to, Representative Tarwater?
Start with Representative Tarwater's question. So yes, we have done a criminal background check, and that would be for the boxing commissioner because it is authorized by statute. And so our interpretation and our ability to to do a criminal background check is a function of the executive order that LPA mentioned, as well as the guidance from the Department of Administration, which is kind of statutorily tasked with establishing personnel, policies, and procedures for state agencies. And we've got crystal clear guidance from the Department of Administration that executive branch agencies cannot perform these criminal history background checks. And so we support the legislature giving state agencies that authority.
That was going to be my follow-up, Madam Chair, is what do we need to do to give you the
Well,
authority?
I appreciate that, Representative Tarwater. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm going to ask a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
And it's going to expose some daylight. So thank you for being here.
Sure.
Do you have employees that are telecommuting now, working from home?
We probably have a handful,
And
yeah.
is that in statute?
I'm not sure.
No, it's not. I'm asking this because I could go down a list of items that you do that are not in statute. So therefore, which is it? You follow the statute to the letter of the law, or you throw common sense out the door on checking financial backgrounds for somebody that is going to be managing millions of dollars.
I'm not aware that there's a policy against remote work, whereas we have express guidance from the Department of Administration that says we are unable to perform these criminal background checks. And that's per legislative post-audit, right? They also talked to D of A.
And they gave you 2 or 3 methods that you could use to check an individual's background. I mean,
I disagree. I don't think D of A gave us those methods. I think D of A would say those are backdoor methods to circumvent the policy and where things are. So post-audit may have suggested doing a kind of a credit check.
respectfully, Mr. North, you are looking for a scapegoat. Accept responsibility. You hired a felon to manage millions of dollars in grant money, and you're looking for a scapegoat. I can't imagine any business that would not do some kind of checks. Are you going to continue to hire people in this same manner?
We're not going to be able to provide criminal background checks until the legislature
So I think,
changes the law.
I think we should absolutely put a freeze. We'll find out what this committee's authority is for any hiring of financial, any hiring for financial ability. We found out this year that we have some legal authority in this committee, and I think we might take advantage of that because this is just common sense. And so you're playing a wordsmith game saying we have to legislate in order for you to be able to do these kind of checks and balances. Committee, any other comments or questions? Seeing none? Representative Probst.
I do have a question. So I want to make sure I'm understanding this right. Is it Executive Order 1812 that prohibits the ability to do a background check?
That's part of it. The other part is there is guidance from the Department of Administration on this issue.
Is that guidance based on something that's in statute?
I mean, that'd be a good question for the Department of Administration. I'm not sure if that was asked of D of A during this audit, but that is the guidance that executive branch agencies have.
Because I can look at Order 1812, and it very clearly is a line that says nothing in this order shall prevent the conduct of a criminal background check as a condition of employment. I mean, you can't do it in the initial part, but you can do it anywhere else in the process, according to my reading of this. And so I would be curious to know what the Department of Administration's guidance, whether that's based on 1812 or whether that's based on some statutory language that we don't have in front of us.
Thank you. Representative Probst, is the Department of Administration here to answer that question? Anybody? So Chris, would you mind reaching out to them so we can get clarification? Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to add on to it, if it would be okay with the chairperson, what would be the rationale for this additional guidance that prohibits it? Surely there's a reason, so if we could get that.
Thank you. Committee, any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. Committee will move on to the, it does say a 15-minute break, or no, the economic development evaluation. Sorry about that. So Andy, would you, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, this is an economic development incentive evaluation. And it covers two totally distinct tax credits. And so it's probably going to feel a little bit like I'm giving you two separate reports, but we'll take one and then the other. The first one is an evaluation of the alternative fuel tax credit, and the second is an evaluation of the community service tax credit. And I'll table the community service tax credit for the time being and just focus on the alternative fuel tax credit. So the question that we answered for the alternative fuel tax credit is how and why the use of that credit has changed over time. And if we go to page 4, you will see that at the top, we found that the alternative fuel tax credit has rarely been used since 2007 because of statutory changes that limited its usefulness. Before we get into its use, which I'll talk about in just a moment, I'd like to talk a little bit about what the credit is. So this is on page 4. This provides credits specifically to corporations for 40% of the incremental cost of alternative fuel vehicles, or 40% of fueling stations installation cost, up to $100,000 per station. So the incremental cost that I just mentioned is the difference between the sort of normal gasoline-powered version of a vehicle and the same make and model that runs on an alternative fuel. And statute defines an alternative fuel, as you can see on page 4, as fuel derived from sources like grain, biomass, biogas. This is things like ethanol, biodiesel. It does not include electricity, so battery electric vehicles and hybrid vehicles are not covered by the credit. As I mentioned just a moment ago, the credit is only available to corporations, so individual taxpayers are also not credit eligible. At the bottom of page 4, you'll see that the legislature created this credit in 1995, and we talk about a few key amendments that are made to this credit over the years. You'll note that initially this credit referenced the federal definition of alternative fuel, which did include electricity. So initially, battery electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles would have been included, not just ethanol, biodiesel, those types of vehicles. But at the very, very bottom of page 4, you will see that the legislature in 2007 changed the definition of alternative fuel to exclude electricity. At the top of page 5, you will see also that the legislature excluded individual taxpayers in 2012 as part of a broader sort of overhaul of the tax code. And so again, 2007, electricity was removed as an eligible fuel. 2012, individual taxpayers were removed as eligible recipients, and those decisions played a major role in how much this has been used in the years since. And we show that on page 6. Figure 1 is, I think, a pretty good overview of how this credit has been used over the years. So you'll see that initially it was not used very much. Fewer than 5 total taxpayers claimed it in those first few years, and it really took off in 2005 and reached its peak in 2007 when 125 claims were made, which is 20% of all the claims that have been made all time, which is 612 total. And you'll see that in the years after that, use of the credit has really tailed off to virtually nothing. There's a couple of years since 2014 when it was 0. And then in those other years, there are fewer than 5 total corporations that have claimed this credit. So in the years since 2007, the change that was made then, 2012, the change that was made then, it's really tailed off. Now, as you'll see at the bottom of page 6 and on page 7 and 8, we think this is because those changes that were made to the credit made it less useful as the market evolved for alternative fuel vehicles. We have the supply side of that market outlined on Figure 2. So you'll see the blue line there is what are called flex fuel vehicles. These are vehicles that can run on an up to 85% ethanol blend. So ethanol is one of the main fuels that is still covered by the credit along with biodiesel. So this is an example of how the market has evolved over time. You can see that in the blue line there, the flex fuel vehicle market peaked in 2014 and has tailed off since. So what this is showing is how many vehicles were available for sale, models were available for sale in the United States that run on E85. You can see that it peaked in 2014 and it has tailed off to just 5 vehicles, models that are for sale in the United States in 2024. So it's 2% of the alternative fuel vehicle market. By contrast, you'll see that the electric vehicle and hybrid vehicle market has taken off in recent years, and now it makes up 91% of the market for alternative fuel vehicles. There are 292 models that are available for sale, but again, those are not covered by the credit. So that removal of electricity made it less useful as the market evolved. The demand side of this equation, you can see on the next page, Figure 3, and you can see electric and hybrid vehicle sales have skyrocketed in the last several years from 2000, when there were about 9,500 sales, to 2021, which is the most recent data we have, when there were 1.4 million sales of electric and hybrid vehicles. And at the bottom of page 8, you'll see we think that eliminating individual taxpayers probably has affected its use as well. So 98%, according to the Department of Revenue, of filers every year are individuals. So removing individuals removes the vast majority of filers. And we think probably adding those people back in would increase the credit's use if, along with that, electricity were made an eligible alternative fuel, because again, the market has changed so much in the years since that change was made that it's not capturing the majority of the vehicles that are available for sale. You'll see at the top of page 9 that Kansas's credit is unique. So 47 states and DC have incentives for alternative fuel vehicles. Only Kansas's excludes both electricity and individual taxpayers for both infrastructure and vehicles. Other states, as we say in that bottom bullet, right before our answer to the next question, have moved in the opposite direction. So while Kansas was eliminating electricity, other states have gone more toward electricity. We have an example of Colorado here, where they had very similar credits, Colorado and Kansas in the 90s, and Colorado in the years since has gone to eliminate all other types of fuel, and only electricity is eligible for their credit. So they've sort of done the opposite of what Kansas has done over the years. Okay, that's the alternative fuel tax credit. We're going to switch gears entirely now to the community service tax credit. And the question that we answered is on page 2. How many projects has the Department of Commerce awarded community service tax credits to in recent years, and how did they make those decisions? You'll see in the middle of page 9, Commerce awarded $8.2 million in community service tax credits during 23 and 24, which are the 2 years we looked at in detail, but didn't fully document their selection decisions, and we'll get into that in a moment. But first, a little bit about what the credit is. So this is the bottom of page 9. This is a credit that provides credits to individuals, corporations, banks, and insurance companies that donate money to certain community service projects. Now, to be eligible for the credit, state law requires projects to fall into 4 areas. We outline these on the bottom of page 9, top of page 10. There's a kind of a general community service category that includes any activity that meets a demonstrated community need and will achieve improved educational and social services for Kansas children and their families. Examples of this include things like building shelters for people who are experiencing homelessness, upgrading libraries, upgrading museums. It's a very broad category. Page 10, you'll see the next category is crime prevention. So these are things like providing substance abuse treatment to inmates. Next, we have youth apprenticeship and technical training. These are projects like purchasing equipment for use in technical trade classes. And then finally, healthcare services. These are things like expanding nursing homes or purchasing defibrillators for hospitals. These are all examples that we saw in the data that we reviewed. The credit's worth 50% of the donation in areas with populations of 15,000 or more, and 70% in areas with populations below 15,000. Now, statute, as you can see in sort of the middle of page 10, limits the amount of credits that can be awarded annually to 4.13 million. And the Department of Commerce has the authority to decide how those credits will be distributed to support projects. The flow chart, figure 4 on page 11, kind of outlines this. But what you'll see there is that nonprofit and governmental entities apply to Commerce. They propose a specific project that donors would receive credits for supporting financially. A committee at the Department of Commerce reviews the applications to decide which of the proposed projects will be awarded credits that then they can pass along to their donors. This includes people from Commerce, Commerce employees, as well as other stakeholders in the field. And each project can receive up to $200,000 in total credits. Entities that are awarded credits then use those to encourage donations from people. And when they get a donation, they will enter information about the donor into an online portal. Commerce staff review this, they approve it, and then a certificate is generated for the donor, who then includes that when they file their taxes to show the Department of Revenue that they have indeed made an approved donation. Revenue then processes people's tax returns, of course, so they're involved, but really it's the Department of Commerce that is administering this program. Let's flip to pages 12 and 13 and 14. Let's table 14, 12 and 13, where we'll talk about how much Commerce is awarded to nonprofits. So this is the part of the process where Commerce is deciding which projects to approve and then giving them a certain amount of credits that then they are able to, in turn, pass along to their donors. Since '94, when the credit was created, Commerce has awarded $130 million in total credits to 811 projects. As you can see in figure 5, they have awarded nearly all of the credits that they've been statutorily authorized to award over the years. You'll see that initially the cap was $5 million. That dropped in 2001. And in 27 out of 31 years, Commerce awarded at least 95% of the credits that statute authorized them to hand out to organizations that were proposing projects. On average, each project has received $160,000 in credits for their donors, and 26 projects on average have received an award each year since '94. Let's flip to page 14 now. So this is the next sort of step in the process, and here you can see in figure 6 how many donors then received credits that they could file on their taxes. And we had data for donors only going back to 2010. That's when the online portal that I mentioned was started up. So that's when they started capturing this data at the donor level. But you'll see since 2010, 10,523 total donors have received $48 million in credits. That's an average of $3.7 million per year that is going from the entities that have approved projects to their donors. And that's $4,600 per donor on average. There's an average of 809 donors per year that are participating in this program. Okay, now we're going to skip to page 16. And we're going to talk a little bit in more detail about the application review process that Commerce has, because this is really the meat of the audit. We reviewed their process, got an understanding of it, and then determined how well they applied that process for 6 selected projects. So you'll see again a flowchart figure that summarizes this process. This is figure 7 on page 17. So in essence, the process starts with a review of each proposed project's basic eligibility. So the program coordinator who oversees this for the Department of Commerce checks things like ensuring that the project is in Kansas, or that the entity applying for the credits has paid a $250 application fee, things like that. If they make it through that step, then 2 reviewers are randomly assigned to review the proposed project and answer a series of questions about it. And these questions, as you'll see in the sub-bullets at the bottom of page 16, fall into 2 categories. 55% of the 150 total possible points that an application can score come from what we call an objective review of the application materials. So this is things like seeing whether the application includes the budget information, financial support letters, community support letters that the Department of Commerce would like them to have. 45% of the 150 possible points is what we call based on the reviewer's professional judgment. So this is asking more subjective questions about things like whether the proposed project is innovative, whether it's likely to meet the identified need in the application, likely to succeed, things like that. Once that scoring is done, Commerce told us that the full review committee, because remember only 2 are reviewing each individual application, the full review committee meets to decide what their final list of recommendations is going to be for the department's secretary, the Secretary of Commerce, as well as how many credits each project will receive. And then the Secretary of Commerce makes the final determination based on the recommendations of the full review committee. So if you flip with me to page 18, on 18, 19, 20, and 21, we talk about our review. So we selected 6 projects from 2023 and 2024, 3 of which were awarded credits, 3 of which were not awarded credits, and they're from different parts of the state and different types of projects. And we reviewed, talked to Commerce officials, reviewed documentation that they had available to see how well they followed this process that they outlined for us. And figure 8 summarizes what we found. So you'll see, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the middle of the figure, the scoring rubric part. You'll see that we found that all 6 projects that we reviewed had complete reviews on the objective elements and the more subjective professional judgment elements of the application scoring process. So we saw that for all 6. What we didn't see was documentation of the steps that happened before or after that. So before that, we have the basic eligibility check that I mentioned before. We didn't see documentation of who did that, when that happened, or what they looked for. And we note that in figure 8. So we have basic eligibility check, we have the scoring, and then after the scoring process, we have, again, the full review committee meeting to decide which projects to propose to the Secretary of Commerce for approval. And we also didn't see documentation of that meeting and how they talked about the projects that were proposed and how they made their decisions. Finally, then, you'll see that the final award decision, which is the Secretary of Commerce deciding whether or not to accept the final recommendation of the full review committee. We didn't see documentation of that process, when that might have happened, or sort of what went into that. There was a couple of things, returning quickly to the full review committee meetings that were not documented. There was a couple that we thought would probably be documented of the 6 that we reviewed that we would have expected to see documentation of. We talk about these on page 21. There was one, and you can see this in figure 8, that had an unusually low score that was approved. It scored 96.5 points, which is well below what Commerce told us was sort of the automatic cutoff of 120 for automatically recommending a project to the Secretary of Commerce. They said that that project they chose, despite its lower score, because they thought it would be a way to balance a low-scoring project that they had previously approved for an urban area. They thought it would be successful. They thought it would meet an important regional need, but we didn't see those discussions documented. We also saw one that had 2 very different scores from the 2 reviewers. There was a 64-point difference. And the department told us that they found that the higher scoring reviewer was biased in favor of it. They figured that out and threw out that score because they thought that the lower score was more accurately representative of the project. Again, that's something we would expect to see them discussing during the full review committee meeting, but we didn't see that type of documentation. The other 4 were pretty straightforward. They're all either above or below that 120-point threshold, so those were more straightforward decisions that may not have had a lot of documentation associated with them, but at least 2 of them we thought we would see some documentation of. We have a recommendation. Let's skip to page 23. We have a recommendation to the Department of Commerce. They told us during this that they didn't have a process for documenting the things, the decision points that we didn't see documentation of. So this is the basic eligibility check up front, and then the final assessment meeting at the back end. And so we recommended that they start clearly and completely documenting how they determine that basic eligibility of proposed projects, as well as how they are determining the final list of projects to award community service tax credits. And you can see here and sort of in the verbiage of their broader formal response on pages 24 and 25 that they did not accept that recommendation. So with that, I would answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. I would say that post-audit is hitting a grand slam today. Very nice. Committee, any questions? Representative Tarwater.
Sorry, Madam Chair. So the full committee, when they meet, the review committee, do they only review the ones that the select two individuals thought were good, or do they review all of them?
So what the department told us was that any project that has sort of a consensus score of 120 or above, their process is to automatically recommend that to the secretary for approval. But they said that they can discuss any of the projects and do discuss them as part of this meeting, but we didn't have insight into that because there wasn't documentation.
And then Madam Chair, the score is developed by the two individuals only though, right?
That's correct.
Can the entire committee, when they review other ones, can they change the score?
You'd probably have to ask the department that. I don't know that they could change the score unilaterally, but we did see one instance where there were two scores that were very different, as I mentioned, and they essentially went with the lower score, I think, or saw that as more legitimate because of the higher score's bias, which the reviewer hadn't realized that they had.
Okay, good. That was kind of where I was going with that. Thank you.
Any other questions? I would ask, you made a comment in the report that they are following the process, but then the process isn't documented. So how would we know that they're actually following their process other than their say-so?
Can you direct me to the part of the report where you're seeing that?
I'm on page 19 when the comments were made. It says Commerce followed its application and scoring process for 6 proposed projects we reviewed, but then there wasn't documentation available on that process.
We did see documentation of the scoring process. So in the middle, you can see on figure 8, the scoring rubric column is green with check marks. So that's the reviewers, the 2 reviewers who are randomly assigned to the project. We got copies from the Department of Commerce of all of their scoring of the applications. So we did see documentation of that. But before and after that, there were decision points, the basic eligibility check, and then creating that final list of recommendations for the secretary. Those are the parts we didn't see documentation for. But we did see that they scored all 6 of these projects according to their process.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, any questions of the department? Yes, would the department step forward again? Thank you. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So going back to the transparency database, I did pull up this particular item, and in terms of what their project was, and for example, I pulled up Central Kansas Community Foundation, a foundation that we've worked under nonprofit in my community to build a playground. But I had no idea by looking at it, there's nothing that lists any information about what project it was. Or a community college, what project are you funding? So I was wondering if is that something missing in the statute that we need to update in order to get more clarity of what was selected based on why?
Yeah, thank you, Representative. Yes, the statute does not require the agency to include like a project or grant project description. We do provide that information a lot of times in our press releases, and so if you click on through to that next page that tells you more about the program specifically, I think you can find it there. We also, this particular program, excuse me, so the community service tax credits is included in our annual report that we do all for this committee specifically, and then the two commerce committees. And so more information about those projects can be found there.
But Rachel, wouldn't it fall under benchmark that they established a project, they set a goal, and you're like, yeah, we like that. You really have to, we're going to give you this money to do that thing that we really liked, and we rated it. We gave you a score based on a project. And so wouldn't that fit underneath benchmark? And that is in the statute.
So the benchmark is going to speak more specifically to are they filing those quarterly reports and some of those things to ensure that they're managing their particular grant properly. But in this case, with it being a tax credit, those benchmarks aren't, there just isn't any, right? Like you earn that credit. We do have some checks to make sure that you're meeting I mean, as far as certifying donors and that sort of thing, but it's not, I don't know if we would have specific benchmarks like what you're talking about related to each of the projects within this program.
Something maybe to look at, because again, looking at the database, there's no way for me as a legislator or the general public to know why it was awarded. It's just that it potentially scored well. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, you would think the scoring mechanisms would be available to the public.
Madam Chair, those are, yes.
Okay, great.
So the scoring
Are those on the
rubric.
website?
Yeah, so when you go to the page, that program page, you're going to find all the eligibility requirements, the scoring rubric, and those things. So,
Excellent,
yeah.
thank you. Representative Tarwater, did you want to ask your question about you got your answer? Okay. Any other questions, committee? Seeing none, thank you. Committee, will turn our attention now. Actually, we're scheduled for a break. Would you guys like to take the break now or wait until after the next report? Let's go. Okay. Okay, great. We will move on. We will go into executive session for the KCC security audit. Representative Francis. And I would like to thank Representative Francis and the Kansas contractors for providing lunch today for the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the open meeting of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 754319A to discuss matters relating to the security measures that protect the information systems of the Kansas Corporation Commission with the appropriate individuals from the Legislative Division of Post-Audit and the Kansas Corporation Commission pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 754319B12C, because discussion of such matters in an open meeting would jeopardize such security measures. That the committee resume the open meeting in room 546 south of the State House at 1:30 and to record 1:35, and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
Chris?
The authorized attendees in the executive session from the KCC, Executive Director Lynn Retz, and from Post Audit.
Chris, do you mind if I get a second on the motion? Oh, that's okay. It's been moved by Representative Francis, seconded by Senator Peterson. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Now, Chris, thank you.
Sure. Executive session attendee list from the KCC, Lynn Retz, Executive Director, and from Post Audit, Alex Gard, Kenzie Wilson, Matt Etzel, Manager, and myself.
Good afternoon, committee. We are out of executive session, and we will now take a break until 1:45. So, thank you. Go ahead and get started. I don't know if, is there anybody out in the hall that? Okay, so I'm going to ask the committee, before we continue on really quickly, Chris, there's another audit that will be finished probably within a week or two. And will it just be that one audit? So I was going to ask the committee if they want to meet again before the end of the year or the 1st of January, or we can wait until session starts. Okay. You think it'll be a little longer? Okay. So would you mind if we waited until session started, committee, for the results of that? Or it is the audit for the Department of Commerce grant for a specific company. And so we're earlier. It is once session starts. So what I was wondering, that's why I wanted to take the temperature of the committee. Do you want to meet before the end of the year or the first week in January? Or we can wait until session starts? It's first week in January, and then you may have another audit or two available? You don't think it'll be? Oh, I thought it was almost ready for this time, and then. Oh. Okay, I guess we will wait and just meet until session starts then. Okay. The report won't be ready. There won't be any other reports ready. Is that correct? Okay. Okay, great. You guys have done an excellent job this year. I know we have kept your schedule full. So much appreciated for your work. Let's go to the consent calendar. Kristen.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. On today's consent calendar, which is in tab A, there are 4 items. So 2 of them are things that you all see very regularly, the first of which is in attachment A, and that is the draft minutes for the committee's last meeting, which was October 7th. The second item on the consent calendar is acceptance of the performance audits that were, or IT security audits that were presented today. So that would include the Osawatomie State Hospital, the Department of Commerce's transparency database, the Department of Commerce's pre-employment screening process, the alternative fuel and community service tax credits, and then the IT security audit of the Kansas Corporation Commission. The third item on the consent calendar is approval of limited scope audit. So this is, I'll give you a little bit of background here, but this is what you will find. They're listed in attachments B and C within tab A. So both of those are, if you all will recall, at your last meeting, you had some discussion about conceptually approving, if you will, of a couple of limited scope audits that would follow up on Ford County's election security processes based on a number of recent audits that we've completed of Ford County. So if you look at attachment B, the first of those limited scope audits would answer the question, did Ford County have an adequate process for testing the accuracy of tabulation machines before and after the 2024 general election? And the second audit would look at both limited scopes. The second one would answer, did Ford County have an adequate process for ensuring the number of voted ballots reconciled with the number of voters in the 2024 general election? So this one, the second one in particular, is essentially redoing the one that we did for the 2024 primary election of Ford County a few months ago. The first one, we haven't done that specifically, but again, it's a follow-up to kind of the bigger audit that we completed in 2022. So these are both committee requests. The chair has preliminarily approved of them. So I've got one other item I will cover, but there's no action needed on the part of the committee unless someone is wanting to object and remove that from the consent calendar. The fourth item on the consent calendar is something that you see rarely, which is designation of audits that meet the KGOL law, which is the Kansas Governmental Operations Accountability Law. So it's basically state law requires that this committee designates at least 4 of the audits that we completed in the last year as having met KGOL requirements. So we, as your staff, looked back at the audits that we completed, and we have proposed designating the 4 audits that are listed in tab A as meeting KGOL. So that would be evaluating the Star Bonds financing program, evaluating monitoring requirements and processes for the federal low-income housing tax credit program, evaluating whether fiscal notes include accurate and reasonable estimates, and reviewing the KPERS 3 retirement plan. And that is everything on the consent calendar.
Committee, are there any objections? Seeing none, the consent calendar will be approved. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the proposed legislation from Tamara. Not from you, but presenting.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, committee. You should have a bill draft in your packet somewhere. Looks like this, Senate Bill blank. It's in tab B. This bill draft was requested by the committee at its last meeting, and it would amend the Lay Caregiver Act. This committee had looked into an audit on hospital compliance with this act, but ultimately decided not to do that, and in lieu of that audit, requested a bill on the act. So the bill in front of you would amend KSA 65-431A, which is the Lay Caregiver Act, and would require KDHE to verify that each hospital is in compliance with the requirements of the Lay Caregiver Act. It would audit hospital compliance with the Act and then compile the results of those audits and report the results to the standing health committees of the legislature, and that report would come to you guys annually. Additionally, the bill does make technical changes and would take effect on July 1, 2025 upon publication in the statute book, and I would be happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Tamara. Committee questions? We'll entertain a motion. Representative Probst.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that we accept this bill draft and move forward in getting that legislation pre-filed.
There's a motion. It's been moved by Representative Probst, seconded by Representative Tarwater. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. Tamara.
I would just like to clarify, currently this is drafted as a Senate bill, as bills usually are that go with the House or the chamber of the chair. Would you also like to do a House version of the bill?
Just for clarification, we will do it in both chambers.
Thank you so much.
Committee, next on the agenda is Chris with the hemp.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the October meeting, the committee discussed a currently approved audit looking at the Kansas's hemp program, and the committee was discussing what to do with that proposal, whether to go forward with it or to disregard the proposal, as some changes had been made to the program. The committee asked for additional information, which came from the Department of Agriculture. You should have that in tab C, along with the original proposal. And I believe Senator Ware may have some comments to make.
Thank you. Senator Ware.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, the focus of this was to look at the industrial hemp laws and to see where Kansas is substantially different from other states and or the federal system. And it was going to take 3 auditors in 4 months. But in the meantime, in the last 6 months, the Ag Department has made the decision to go ahead and do the transfer to the USDA at year's end for their licensing and testing. So my original reason for requesting the audit rather, is no longer relevant. And because the public can get this information on the HELP, the hemp e-management platform for themselves anyway, and so there's no auditor needed. In order to save taxpayer money and improve governmental efficiency, I respectfully withdraw the request for this audit.
So is that in the form of a motion?
I would move that we withdraw this audit.
Is there a second? It's been moved by Senator Ware, seconded by Senator Corson. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Senator Ware. Next on the agenda, we'll recognize Matt.
Hello. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Mine will be a fairly quick update. This is just a reminder. Twice a year, we work with agencies that have active recommendations from our audits. So anything from the last 2 years, we would consider an active recommendation. We are just about wrapped up with that process for the second time this year. No issues so far. We are waiting on one agency to respond for one audit, but the results of our audit recommendation work will be posted to our website like we do every 6 months, and then we will be, so just a reminder to be looking in your inboxes here shortly. You will be receiving a link to the website basically notifying you all that that's our reporting process in committee rules. So that's our ability to report to you all on the status of our active audit recommendations, whether or not they've been refused, whether or not they've expired, they're in progress of being implemented, or they have been implemented. So like I said, we're waiting to hear back from one agency, but the other 5 are either in progress or have been implemented that we checked up on for this last 6-month period. So happy to take any questions, but just a reminder that that'll be coming to your inboxes very soon.
Any questions for Matt? I have one. Are you able to tell us what agency, or would you prefer not?
I'm happy. The one that we were waiting on is the Angel Investor Tax Credit Audit from the Department of Commerce.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt. Next on the agenda is Katrin.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I will go over the memo in your notebooks in tab D regarding the IT security audit plan for 2025. This information will require several decisions from the committee, so I'll kind of spell it out for you, and then you guys can discuss this. As you may know, we have been performing IT security audits under KSA 461135 for nearly 10 years now. These audits generally assess the security posture of state agencies and selected school districts as of late. Committee rules do also require us to do a risk assessment every 3 years. We did conduct the last one in 2022, so 2025 will be the next. So in the next year, we'll do another one. These assessments do inform the selection of entities for audit. For 2025, we do have 2 options for you to choose on what these IT security audits will look like. So as you can see there in the memo in bold on page 1 of the memo, a vote for option A would result in performing about 4 to 6 comprehensive IT security audits for selected entities. Those would be in the same confidential audit format that you are familiar with and what you have just recently with KCC heard. We've done this for calendar year 2024. If you do choose that, we would do the same for 2025. For this option, the memo also lays out the potential entities we would audit based on when they were last audited or whether they had had an audit at all. So again, this option has a related audit proposal shown on pages 3 and 4. It gives you a little bit more detail. Now on page 2 of the memo, you will see option B. Under this option, we would perform 2 to 3 performance audits that are focused on IT topics. Those audits would result in public reports. On the same page, you will also see 5 potential topics that we came up with. Option B has related audit proposals shown on pages 5 through 8. On those pages, we provided a little bit more information about the topics that we came up with. So the committee will need to approve or modify and approve either option A or option B. And for option A, we do need a direction from the committee about the choice for a school district, a county, or a city, in case there's room on the schedule for that. And for option B, we need direction from the committee on which 2 to 3 topics they would like us to address. And with that, I stand for questions.
Might be a few questions. So I'm going to give the committee a minute to look this over. If I may, Katrina, option A is just kind of continuing business as usual. Is that it? And then you're taking another path on option B.
That's correct. Option A is doing the same thing that we've done this year and in previous years as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd like to hear comments from the committee on what they think. I know which way I'm leaning. Representative Francis.
So I'm definitely not an expert, but so what's driving the desire from staff to consider the changing the way we do things? What are the benefits of this change to the institution as a whole, to the state?
Yeah, thank you for that question. A good question. Last year we did give the committee an option, and we felt this year we would do the same, given that there is always a little bit of a balance and act between the confidential reporting and public reporting. And so we have tried some public reporting in 2023, and then we went back to this version of confidential reports. And again, this option here is slightly different in that we actually would pick IT topics, but do a public version of IT topics. So again, it's more of a balance and act between being transparent to the taxpayer and continuing with the more in-depth, more rich IT confidential audits.
But isn't the reason that we do the confidential audits is so that we don't identify weaknesses in the system? And if we do these public ones, aren't we going to do the same thing, identify weaknesses in the system to bad actors?
Really, this year, what we're proposing is particular IT issues. So we're not really looking at an entity or a particular system for system failures or security weaknesses. We're really looking at particular topics within the IT realm that might be of interest to the committee. Now, those are topics we have come up with. They're certainly not as developed as our typical audit proposal. So if there's anything else that you have in mind, obviously, we are working at the direction of the committee.
Representative Sawyer.
Yeah. Representative Francis pretty much asked my question, but I'm going to follow up. It's like every time we hear these, we hear a lot of shortcomings, and I feel like we ought to wait till we get through them all. I mean, I think it's really important to these agencies that they get their IT fixed. And looking at this list, one hasn't been since 2009, and the others I don't think ever have. So it's like, to me, I think we need to get through these before we try to go on to other topics. I mean, that'd be my opinion.
Representative Francis.
Well, and I guess when I come back to this thing and I think about the public release of the data, you know, I see evaluating data security controls for accounting systems at selected school districts under option B. And I'm thinking, well, when we do that, then we're letting bad actors know where the problems are in those selected school districts. I mean, honestly, I could see reasons to do both, you know, if that's the problem, if that's where we want to go. You know, I believe the importance of the cybersecurity legislation last year was it's not a question of when we get hacked. Well, it's going to happen, you know, sooner. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when we get hacked. And the better we can prepare the state, the more important it is.
Any other comments? I will warn the committee, I have been approached by departments, agencies that have concern about 291, and it could create more vulnerabilities that it intends. And so we may need to walk it back some. Just giving you a heads up on that. Representative Francis.
Yeah, and I wouldn't argue with you. I just think that was a commitment to our importance to that issue.
Absolutely.
And needs adjusted like any good work.
No, you're spot on, absolutely. Just like any software system, it always needs tweaks. I'm looking through most of B, and to me, it looks like more stuff that could actually be collected from research or not necessarily an audit, at least the salaries portion, and surveys. Yeah, so it sounds like the committee kind of has a grasp of where they wanted to go. What I would ask the committee, is there anything in B that you would like to see added to A? Maybe a hybrid, a C section? So maybe we could do that as, would that be a 100-hour audit or, no, that'd be a longer audit. Okay, could that be could we create a C and do A combined with 4? Would that be reasonable?
If you're looking for a topic, if you want to continue with kind of the confidential audits, it would be cleaner to vote on option B, because the other problem we have is every 3 years we summarize the confidential audits into a public one. So every time, if you were to take a public audit into next year, that'll take time away from doing confidential audits, which makes the 3-year audit that much less rich, because we'll have less to do, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, but what I'm asking is that topic 4 be added to A, so it would be part of the confidential audit. Did I state that?
It's really not something we can legitimately hold confidential as a topic. Now, in April, when the committee meets, we could maybe make that a separate topic altogether as a performance topic. That would be another option.
Okay. I think that's going to, Senator Peterson, okay, thank you. So we will request 4 as an audit to be considered next year. Williams and then Senator Peterson again.
Okay, all right, thank you. Well, I was just also going to say, these are great topics, but these could also be things that I would say our chief information officer needs to be doing and providing back reports to us per legislation that we've already passed. So some of these things may already be in the works, we would hope.
Excellent point. Representative Francis.
I would just say, often our school districts, and like I look at that, evaluating Kansas County's IT security practices and resources, they operate in many instances as independent entities. But I am very interested in those as performance audits, our regular audits. I mean, I could see us doing option A and then having performance audits on at least 4 and maybe 5 or every once in a while.
That sounds like a plan. I think you inadvertently created more work for yourself.
I should have checked with my boss before I opened my mouth.
Yeah, there you go. Committee, any other comments? Okay, so I guess we will, is there a motion before us on one of the options? Representative Francis.
And maybe we ought to take it, should we take it separately? I move that we do option A and then we can work on the other part later.
So do you want to make a motion?
I make a motion that we do option A.
Been moved by Representative Francis, seconded by Senator Peterson. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. So let's go ahead and put in the request to be reviewed by the committee next year for a legislative post audit of topic 4, and then a separate request for topic 5. Do we need to do something else, Chris?
No, I'm reminding Katrin, don't you need some specificity on option A?
On option A, yes, we do need to know if you would like to do the school district, the city, or county. I will note city or county would be new. We have audited school districts in the past. We are just widening the net with that other option of going down county and city road. And again, we're targeting 4 to 6 audits, knowing that we have a little bit of staff limitation next year. So if we don't get to that one, we wouldn't do either one of those 3. But if the committee could just let us know which one they would like to do.
Any preference, committee? Representative Francis.
So we've done a lot of school districts, and number 5 on option B is counties. So I guess I would say one of the cities. I don't know which city everybody thinks would be good.
Katrina, could we pick one county and pick one city, or how many do you want us to pick?
Well, we only have one slot, and again, that is if we get to it. So I need either you going for a district, school district, or a city or a county.
Okay. If you want a city, that would be fine. Anybody recommend the city, or do you want to just pick a city at random?
We would probably target one of those that are listed here, probably a larger one.
Okay, committee, are we okay with the city? Do we want it in form of a motion? Representative Francis moved and Representative Sawyer seconded. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Okay. Is that all, Katrina, that you need from us?
I believe so.
Okay. I wanted to make sure. And thank you again for your work this year. I think those, I understand the transparency, but we would be exposing vulnerabilities by having those audits. So I think the public understands that.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Katrina, I guess you're up next. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair, again, members of the committee. Next, I will go over the memo for your notebooks, tab E. This is regarding the IT monitoring plan for calendar year 2025. This information will require a vote from the committee as well. As you know, the law does require us to monitor ongoing IT projects. To choose projects for monitoring, committee rules require us to do an annual risk assessment of all projects reported to the Kansas Information Technology Office. We did review the KETO dashboard, which showed 19 approved and 30 active projects in October. The memo in front of you does have a breakdown for the active projects by status. Based on the information that we reviewed, we do recommend continuing to monitor the KDHE Early Childhood Data Integration System and Enhancement Project. This is an IT project that the committee approved for monitoring last December. We have been monitoring it since January. The project is a highest cost project at an estimated $5 million and was in alert status due to the project schedule slipping. Its project risk is also high, given the number of interfaces to other information systems that it will need, such as keys, PayIt, and KBI fingerprinting. So again, because we are already monitoring it and there has been some issues with it and it is high risk, we're simply recommending to continue watching the same one. And with that, I stand for questions.
Committee questions, and I don't mean to put the chairman or vice chairman of JCIT on the spot, but if I remember correctly, there is 1 or 2 projects that's in possibly worse shape than this one. Did you get a chance to look at the last report to the JCIT committee?
If it was the one in October, yes. I don't remember which ones were worse. Again, part of it has to do with where in the cycle they are. You know, if they're already that far along that they're already in bad shape and everybody knows it, we wouldn't really add any value to it. So that's kind of why we continue with this one, or suggested.
Okay, thank you, Senator Peterson. So we will do that, and I know you're looking for the form of a motion. Is that a motion? Thank you. Senator Peterson moved. Is there a second? Moved by Senator Peterson, seconded by Representative Francis. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. We'll move to the next item. Thank you, Katrin. I apologize, I say Katrina. So, Chris, thank you.
Okay, turn to the next tab. Committee Rule 1.5F requires that we identify which audits that we've done this past year are of particular relevance to standing legislative committees. The rule further requires that we offer to meet with the chair, the vice chair, and the ranking minority member of each of these committees, and that we share our proposed meeting schedule with you beforehand. We typically provide a summary of our audit work over the last year with House Appropriations and Senate Ways and Means early in the session, so those committees are not listed below. So this is what we've come up with. I'm open to any additional committees you think we should reach out to. For the Ford County Ballot Reconciliation Limited Scope, we have Senate, Fed, and State, and House elections. Osawatomie that you heard today, Senate Public Health and Welfare, and House Health and Human Services. TANF, Senate Public Health and Welfare, House Child Welfare and Foster Care. The Economic Development Audit you heard today on the alternative fuel and the community service tax credits. To Senate Assessment and Tax, Senate Commerce, House Commerce, and House Tax. Star bonds to Senate Assessment and Tax, Senate Commerce, House Commerce, and House Tax. Same for tax increment financing. The KBI IT security audit that you heard in October to House General Government Budget. The Department of Commerce Angel Investor to Senate Assessment and Tax, Senate Commerce, House Tax, and the Commerce Transparency Database that you heard today to Senate Commerce and House Commerce, and the hiring screening process that you also heard today from Commerce to Senate Commerce and House Commerce. Open to any other suggestions?
This is excellent. I would make one suggestion that the transparency database also go to the tax committees.
Okay.
Representative Tarwater.
I just want to point out that Commerce only meets 5 days a week, so I don't know if we can get through all of these in 90 days. But I think that maybe the Osawatomie and the TANF should also be pitched to the appropriations committees in both chambers.
Excellent suggestion. Any other suggestions? Thank you, Chris. So committee, we will turn our attention. The next portion is in executive session again. Representative Francis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the open meeting of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee be recessed for a closed executive meeting pursuant to KSA 754319A to discuss matters relating to the annual evaluation of the post-auditor with the appropriate individuals pursuant to the justification listed in KSA 754319B1 because such evaluation constitutes a need to discuss a personnel matter of non-elected personnel, that the committee resume the open meeting in room 546S of the State House at 2:40, and to record this motion if adopted as part of the committee's permanent records.
Representative Francis, I'm not sure. We'll take 20.
Let me change that to, tell me what?
2:30.
2:30.
Thank Is there a second on the motion? Okay, it's been moved by Representative Francis, seconded by Representative Sawyer. Discussion on the motion? Seeing none. All those in favor, say aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Chris will announce.
The individuals in the room are Tom Day at the beginning, and then myself when Tom is finished.
We'll go ahead and finish up. Chris has some comments for us. And
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to go over some 2024 highlights, our office highlights for the committee. This is in a memo in tab H in your binders. I wanted to recognize our staff. We continue to be recognized as leaders in the audit community nationwide. In 2024, our report on K-12 cost study won the prestigious Excellence in Research Methods Award, and our Star Bonds audit won an Impact Award, both from the National Legislative Program Evaluation Society. Our staff have continued to maintain important roles across the nation. Andy Brienzo, who presented the Economic Development Audit, continues to serve on the Pew Incentive Evaluation Network Advisory Board, and I continue to serve on the Governmental Accounting Standards Advisory Council. Our staff also actively participate in peer review. Peer review is when the auditors get audited, and to meet auditing standards, we participate in this process. So every 3 years, other states send staff to our office to put us through the grill, and then we send staff out to audit other state shops as well. In 2024, Heidi Zimmerman did the Wyoming audit, and Katrin Osterhaus did the New York review. In 2025, coming up, Alex Gard is going to do the Connecticut peer review. We have revisited and enhanced our training processes to develop our own staff. This is accumulation of lots of internal discussions and will be a long-term project, but we're holding weekly training sessions, highlighting essential parts of our work like summarizing information, writing reports, checking data for reliability, and working with large data sets. Our podcasts, as you know, continue to be popular even globally. We continue to receive positive feedback and exposure from our audit podcasts, and listeners are tuning in from across the country and across the world. We keep trying to challenge ourselves with new analysis and data visualization. This includes using the location quotient method in the Star Bonds audit and interactive data visualizations on the community college athletics audit. And lastly, staff continue to have very positive opinions about working at Legislative Post Audit. We poll our staff annually, and this year's staff satisfaction survey was again very positive, and over the last 2 years, overall job satisfaction has averaged 97%.
excellent. Congratulations, Chris, to you and your team. Job well done again. So thank you. I know Chris wants to go over the next meeting date.
In your notebooks, near the back, we have the upcoming meetings listing. Looks like this. So just, I don't need to go over the audits we went over today. So coming up, audits that will be ready in January of 2025, tentatively. Ones you have approved: Adult Virtual School, Veterans Claims Assistance Program, Water Certification Limited Scope, the Base Grant 1.0 Limited Scope, the Soft Warfare Base Grant 1.0 Limited Scope, and an IT security audit of the USD 501 Topeka School Districts. At the first meeting of the session, you are required to meet within 2 weeks of the start of the session, and at that meeting, the committee will elect new leadership from amongst yourselves. And in January 2025, before the January 31st, we have to have Department of Commerce come make an annual presentation, also by statute. Looking ahead, we're not necessarily meeting all these dates, but this is when audits will be tentatively available: February, the KDOT Cost Share Limited Scope, the 2 Ford County Limited Scopes you approved today, IT security, depending on whatever we approve today, and the IT project monitoring memo for the project that we're going to continue monitoring. ready in April or so. Transient guest tax, abuse and neglect registries, the follow-up audits, again, more IT security audits. And last but not least, the free lunch count that you had approved should be ready roughly May. Normally in the session, the committee traditionally has met on Wednesdays at noon. Not every Wednesday at noon, but when they meet, a Wednesday at noon. So I didn't know if you wanted to set a date now, within 2 weeks of the start of the session, or you can do that later.
No, I think we should go ahead and set a date. The first Wednesday or the second Wednesday? Second Wednesday? Oh, thank you. Thank you for the reminder. So we'll meet the second Wednesday in January. Of session, yeah. Yeah, sorry. So that would be 20. Any other business before the committee? Seeing none, I just want to thank you again. Thank staff, Legislative Post Audit, the revisors. We could not do our jobs without you guys. Very much appreciated. And thank you, committee members. It's been excellent working with you. I think we've got a lot accomplished this year. I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we'll see you in January.
Madam Chair, I just wanted to say thank you for your leadership this year.
Oh, thank you. That's kind of you. Thank you.